Hello and good evening. My name is Neil Morris. I'm one of the lead educators for Blended Learning Essentials Getting Started, which is an online course running on the FutureLearn platform. This is a live Q&A for week 5 of Blended Learning Essentials Getting Started, and it's our last Q&A for this course. And we're running it through Google Hangout on Air, which is available to view live and also to watch on YouTube, live streamed, and also to watch recorded after the event. So if you're watching the recording after the session, welcome, and I hope you find it a useful resource to support your practice. So as people are joining the live Q&A, we'll get started with answering your questions. Questions have been gathered from a number of sources to answer on this live Q&A, primarily from the FutureLearn platform, futurelearn.com, the Blended Learning Essentials Getting Started course, where we've been gathering questions from participants. We also have questions which have come in from Twitter, where we use the hashtag FLBLE1. And we'll answer questions which come in live through the Google Hangout on Air, so people who are participating in the course in the live Q&A on Google will be able to ask their questions, and they'll pop up on the screen in front of me for me to answer as we go through the session. So we'll get started with some of the questions that have already come in on the FutureLearn platform from participants. And our first question is about learner analytics. So one of the participants has said, we've not learned anything about learning analytics on this course. Do you think it will play a role in blended learning? Well, yes, I think blended learning is going to benefit hugely from learning analytics in the future. We already are awash with data about our learners, that comes from our systems, from our examination processes, and from our learners themselves. But at the moment, we're in that mode where we're not entirely sure how to work with this data. How to best use it, and most importantly probably how to present it back to ourselves as educators and to students to help improve the learner outcomes. So learner analytics, I think, is going to form a very large part of the future of education, but at the moment I think many people are struggling with the amount of data that we're collecting and working out how to make best use of it, and particularly to make best use of it in a timely fashion to be able to influence learners' outcomes. Often we look at data after a course is finished for evaluation purposes, and that might help the future cohort of learners, but it doesn't help the learners who need it at the time of their study. So there's a huge amount of work to do which needs to involve computer scientists and educators, and obviously corporate organisations, to think about how we can best use learner data to support learners as they're going through their courses. And this will help us on our endeavour to move towards much more personalised and much more adaptive online learning, whereby we're able to, in real time, adjust a learner's interactions and resources which are available to them, making use of data which we're collecting, evaluating and analysing in the background. The reason there isn't very much on learning analytics in Blended Learning Essentials Getting Started is because we spend much more time on it in the second course of Blended Learning Essentials. So this is my first plug, which is called Blended Learning Essentials Embedding Practice. And that course is designed to help practitioners who have had a beginning to understand the role of blended learning, to try something out and to come to the second course with a bit more of an informed view of what works and what doesn't, to discuss how to embed blended learning. And learner analytics forms part of that embedding. So I'd encourage you to sign up for the second course, which is running again on the FutureLearn platform soon. So I'll forget to say all the way, but thank you all very much for the number of questions that we've received. It's very nice to be able to answer your questions in this way. So the second part of the question about learner analytics is the need to combine data sets from a whole range of different platforms and sources. And this is a really important question. We collect data about our learners on a number of different sources. For example, our virtual learning environment, student management systems, possibly even social media sites, and a whole range of web resources. And in the future, we'll want to be able to combine all of that data in real time to give us a holistic view of the learner. And you're absolutely right, this is going to be important. How easy it will be to do, I think, is a big challenge for the sector. It's often difficult enough to get systems to communicate with one another when you're trying to do systems integration, but adding that extra layer of live data flows to enable things like dashboards to pick up data from a whole range of sources and present it in an appropriate way and a useful way to a learner is, I think, a challenge that still eludes us. I certainly haven't seen anybody who's achieved that on an institutional scale. Okay, so the next question we had was about students using mobile devices in classrooms for them to participate. So some of the tools that we've talked about involve students downloading apps, installing them on their device, perhaps adding a code to join a session so that they're able to interact. And the question is really about how should we approach this as educators in terms of giving guidance, pointing out some of the risks to our users, to learners, alongside obviously the opportunities and benefits for them in terms of learning. And it's absolutely right, we do need to be upfront and transparent with our learners about these tools, about what data will be collected in the background from them, what information it may require the user to enter in terms of personal information. And so I think it's important, it's part of our digital literacy, it's part of our learners' digital literacy, that awareness of what data is being collected by systems. So we need to have a conversation with our learners about privacy and about data protection when we are using these. We don't need to make this overly burdensome, it's just about raising awareness. Another question was about the range of tools that we have introduced during Blended Learning Essentials Getting Started. It can be quite overwhelming. We try to be careful not to introduce too many ideas in a course like this. But of course, with so many participants usefully contributing their own ideas, it can mean that there's quite an overwhelming amount of new tools being offered up, some of which may have similar functionalities. And the question really is about where do we get the training as educators to use these tools effectively with our learners. Now, a course such as Blended Learning Essentials is not intended to be a skills training course. It's not a course on how to. And the reason we do that is because we're much more interested in the concepts. We want you to be able to switch between tools as they come and go, and we want you to understand the underpinning concepts about why and how you might use a particular tool for a specific learning purpose. So we don't want to delve into the how-to of tools, because the other reason for not doing that is these tools change constantly, and the best people to provide you with the guide on how to use them is the tool provider itself. So all of the tools that we've talked about have a comprehensive user guide available on the internet to guide you through using their tool most effectively. It won't be talking about education, but it will be talking about the use of the tool generally, and that's where you can get your training information. Okay, another related question was about using tools and advice from us about other courses be those online or physical courses where teachers can get digital literacy training. So I don't have much to offer here other than what we've already provided through the course in terms of the links to a whole range of digital skills training resources that we've provided, and a number of which you have critiqued yourselves and highlighted their strengths and weaknesses, and particularly the particular levels of competence that people should use for different levels. So I think it's just a case of Googling, of searching for online courses. You may be interested in a platform called Lynda. Lynda is a very popular online platform, particularly focused around training courses, and there are a whole range of IT and digital related training courses available on Lynda. So I'd advise going and having a look at that. Okay, there's a question just popped up on the Google Hangout, which if you're viewing Google Hangout, you'll be able to see in the top right-hand corner. So the question says, how do you think educators should best prepare students for understanding how their digital footprint might form over time? Do blended students have a right to be forgotten, etc.? Yes, and this is again, a very important question. It falls under that realm of digital literacy, and very interestingly, we've launched a course at the University of Leeds which is called Studying in a Digital Age, and it's an entirely online credit-bearing course aimed at our incoming undergraduate students, so year one, level one in the UK. And this course was put together for many of the reasons that you've outlined during this course about the need for students' digital literacy. And one of the things that we study within that course is about digital footprints and the impact that a digital footprint is going to have on students' future employability, particularly talking about case studies of employers who are commonly searching social media for intelligence about their prospective employees, and for the need for learners to have a cognizance of their digital footprint and to separate out often their social, personal and their professional lives. And of course this is something that we all have to manage day in, day out, as to whether we merge our social, professional Twitter accounts, our Facebook accounts, and that awareness is something that we all need to have increasingly. And of course, the second part of the question, do blended students have a right to be forgotten, is very pertinent in Europe as a result of recent EU regulation changes that enable searches, Google content to be, internet content to be deleted. And how you bring this into a virtual learning environment, I don't know if it's been tackled, to be honest. I don't know of a right to delete online learning content from our institutional systems. We have takedown policies for everything online, so I assume it would fall under that, whereby any user, be that student, staff or external member of the public, would be able to request any content to be removed. But a very interesting question, which I think is going to continue over the years. Okay, so I'm just moving on through the questions on the platform. There's a question about how do we get our students to make best use of blended learning, and how do we encourage them to embrace this type of learning. And this is a challenge. Obviously learners are coming to us from all different perspectives, globally, educationally, digitally, technology wise, and we have to try to accommodate all of their previous experiences, their motivations and their learning goals and their preferences for learning when we are interacting with them. And so one of the things that I've said previously about how we encourage staff to make use of blended learning, I think applies to students. What we often forget to talk to our students about why we're using a particular learning mode or a learning approach. And I've found in my own practice that informing students of the evidence as to why a particular approach is being used can really support their engagement. So providing them just a very brief overview of some of the research evidence or the rationale or the evidence of why a particular approach is advocating that approach in terms of their engagement, their learning outcomes, their performance, can really stimulate their engagement. If they know there's a reason for doing something, they will often be much more willing to engage with it, other than just doing it because the teacher has told them to. So I would try to inculcate them, to engage them, to embed them in your own practice and make them active participants. Get them involved in that change, get them supporting that change with you. And then a follow-up question that comes from that is about learners of different cultures, and how as educators do we need to consider the potential impacts of groups of learners within our cohorts having different cultural values and expectations when it comes to use of digital technology. And I think this is, a really important question, and it's something that we think about a lot with our open online courses, because they are open and they are online, and we attract learners from over 120 countries, many of which will be coming to this course with particular experiences of learning and the role particularly of the educator and the student. And for example, in some cultures, challenging, questioning, discussing is not as prevalent as it is in other cultures. And so when you put out a course which has got a lot of learner interactivity, a lot of engagement from learners, and a lot of learner content, this can feel unfamiliar to learners who haven't experienced this before. So again, we have to go back to the basics of rationalizing it, explaining the value of it, giving people a safe place and safe tools and a safe environment to feel that they're able to engage with these activities on their terms, and that they can see the value of doing so. So considerations of different cultures is very important with blended learning, but it doesn't mean it needs to be a barrier. So another question that we've had was about not culture, but about educational level. So this question is about trends in the UK for integration of blended learning at college level and at HE level. So particularly at college level, so secondary school or sixth form college, that was one of the intended audiences for this course, in that kind of sector of wanting to support practitioners alongside in the FE college system to make better use of blended learning and to understand it. But there are a number of really interesting case studies from the school sector of embedding and integrating use of digital technologies. Some of those involve wholesale introduction of digital technologies. In fact, there's quite a famous story from a school in the UK where the iPod, it was a few years ago, was provided to all students as a learning tool to provide additional resources. And there was an evaluation study that showed increase in learner outcomes as a result of that embedding of digital technology across the school. There are many examples of digital devices being deployed to school students in the UK, both at secondary and primary school level. Often the motivations for these from the school have come from an administrative perspective, but increasingly they're starting to make better use of these devices in learning and teaching within the classroom. But there aren't a huge number of examples of evaluation and research into the effectiveness of those implementations on learning, but I think we'll start to see that in the literature more and more over the coming years. In the HE sector, blended learning in the UK is very widespread. Whether it's embedded and implemented throughout all aspects of all higher education systems, I think, is to be questioned, but a lot of universities do have blended learning or equivalent strategies. Okay, so there's another question here which sounds like it's a school level question about wanting to embed digital technologies within the classroom, but being certain that a manager won't authorise this because of concerns about how the technology will be abused by the students, and any advice that we can offer to try to overcome that. I think the first piece of advice I would give is to encourage that manager, that leader, to sign up to a course such as Blended Learning Essentials, so that they can see for themselves how digital technology is powerfully useful in a learning scenario, and so that can immediately remove the barrier of these being tools which are just abused within classrooms. So that would be my first piece of advice. If you can't persuade the manager to sign up to the course themselves, I think you'll be able to provide them with lots of case studies and good examples and stories from this, you taking the course, that will at least get their imagination thinking about the potential opportunities this would offer, instead of the potential disadvantages of students having access to a device in classroom. What I think we need to come back to in all of these kinds of questions is, if our learners are engaged and active and involved in their learning, then they're not going to feel the need to be distracted and to go and search on Facebook and to waste their time. But that's all about our course design and our lesson planning, and thinking about how we're going to make use of the digital technology effectively. There may be times where we say there is no technology in this class, but when we do use it, we're going to be using it in these ways and it will have this purpose. And I think if we're quite clear with our learners about the value of this, and we're engaging them and they're active in learning activities, then they're not going to feel the need to be distracted. I hope that it's helpful. Okay, there's a question about designing online courses, which has come out of, I suspect, going through week 4 and looking at potential ways in which blended learning courses can be designed. We've provided one such tool. The question is, do you have suggestions for similar checklists and templates that will be helpful for the design of effective blended courses? And nothing immediately sprung to mind when I read this question, but I have had a quick look for things that I've seen used in the past, and I remembered a site actually from the US, and interestingly the person who asked the question is US based, so you may be aware of this, but University of Central Florida has done a lot of work with blended learning, and they have a really comprehensive set of online resources which they've published as open educational resources for the community, and this is a toolkit around blended learning course design. So a quick Google of UCF blended learning toolkit will get you to a very rich set of resources for creating, designing and designing blended learning courses, and there's a whole range of templates and advice available on that site. So I hope that's helpful. There's a question from somebody who's actually on holiday and isn't going to be with us, but hopefully they'll be able to catch up when they return from holiday. I hope they had a nice holiday. What advice would you give us in starting to adopt a blended learning module to courses? I suspect the question is about where do we start? How do we get from doing this course into trying something out? Well, the advice is always just to pick one intervention, try it with your learners, evaluate it, but make sure you're doing it conscious of your curriculum design. So don't just add in a tool for the sake of it. Go back and think about your course design, think about your intended learning outcomes, and think about where a single digital technology may enhance what you're trying to do with your students in more traditional ways. So don't try to do everything at once. Don't throw all of these approaches at your learners simultaneously. Look at your course design, look at one intervention, think about how you can use it, go through all of the advice about harnessing and embedding and using and bringing on board a single technology, and get to feel comfortable with that one with your learners, evaluate it in your own practice, and then you can iterate, you can build up, you can bring in additional approaches based on the reaction and the feedback and the success of that first intervention. So my advice would be, start with your curriculum design, start with your learning outcomes, and approach it with a single intervention. Okay, so that's all of the questions that we had on the platform, and we've had a question on the Hangout, which we've answered, and I don't have any more questions to answer. Oh, I beg your pardon, there's one here on Twitter. Sorry, so we have a question on Twitter. What key online resource depositories exist in other European languages to help spread the message about blended learning? Oh, a difficult question. I don't know the answer. What repositories are there available for open educational resources outside of the English language? I'm only going to be able to retweet that from my Twitter account and see if anybody in my community is able to answer that. And if any of you are following me on Twitter, it's Neil Morris Leeds, feel free to retweet that, and let's see if we can get that question answered with some specific examples. Okay, just having another look through Twitter to make sure there's no other questions. No, those are all the ones back to last week. Okay, so I think we're probably going to have a shorter Q&A this week because we've been through all of the questions that have been posted. Unless there are any more burning questions from live viewers, we've answered everything on the platform, on Twitter and on the Hangout. And so we will probably leave it there for now, and the recording will be available immediately, and I wish you all the very best. We hope to see you on another Blended Learning Essentials course or another course on Future Learn in the future. If you have any other outstanding questions, please post them in the platform, and I'll try to answer them over the next few days. Just leaves for me to thank you and to wish you all the very best.